Today's proceedings. The FDP on 11th June 2020 started with a prayer song. The first speaker was Professor B. Parvati from Andhra University, Vizag. She spoke on the topic K.R. Srinivas Iyengar's Indian Writing in English, the bedrock of critical assessment. She gave valuable inputs in her talk, which was followed by an interesting interaction. The second speaker, Dr. Rosita Joseph, Assistant Professor from Geetham University, Vizag, spoke on the English novel as history from the margins. She made a moving presentation, which was followed by an interesting presentation, an interesting participation and interaction. Today, our esteemed resource persons are Dr. Uma Maheshwari Brugubanda and Sri Mohan Krishna Indraganti. I request Mrs. Y. Supriya, Faculty, Department of English, to introduce Dr. Uma Maheshwari Brugubanda.
Good morning to everyone. My immense pleasure.
Louder.
Good morning to everyone. It's my immense pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Maheshwari Brugubanda. It's wise to be hopeful even in tough times and be vigilant, always looking for opportunities.
Excuses, please. Wait.
Hello. Sorry for the interruption. It's wise to be hopeful even in tough times and be vigilant, always looking for opportunities and grab the opportunity. Hello. Hello. Now it's coming. Okay. Sorry for the interruption. Good morning to everyone. It's my immense pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Dr. Uma Maheshwari Brugubanda. It is wise to be hopeful even in tough times and be vigilant, always looking for opportunities and grab the opportunities whenever they come up and turn them into advantages. The great Indian film personality of international repute, Satyajit Ray, once confirmed it, quoting the Chinese saying that the greatest things can be achieved in the worst conditions, keeping in view the masterpieces made by our bold film directors without any sophisticated equipment. Getting wonderful speakers for this 3-day faculty development program is one such great opportunities we grabbed during this lockdown period. One of the eminent resource persons we got for this program, by God's grace, is Dr. Uma Maheshwari. Assistant Professor, Department of Cultural Studies, the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, and also the coordinator for MA Literary and Cultural Studies program. I can proudly state that Dr. Uma Maheshwari is an alumna of Maristella College. She did her BA with English Literature in Maristella College in 1992. Her student days in Maristella College can be fondly cherished. She was brilliant in academics and active in co-curricular events as well. She used to participate actively in several competitions and won prizes. Her academics as well as professional record showed her wide areas of interest. She got her PhD on genealogies of the citizen devotee, popular cinema, religion, and politics in South India in 2011 from Columbia University, New York, and also got a certificate in comparative literature and society, Columbia University in the same year. She did her master's in socio-cultural anthropology, Columbia University, New York in 2002. Prior to that, she did her MPhil in 1996 in English, University of Hyderabad, and MA in 1994 in English, University of Hyderabad. She authored, co-authored, and co-edited a good number of books. She is the author of Deities and Devotees, Cinema, Religion, and Politics in South India, 2018. She has co-edited a translation work, Vegetarians Only, Stories of Telugu Muslims in 2016, and is a co-editor of Towards a World of Equals, a bilingual textbook on gender in 2015. She contributed chapters, research articles, and reviews in several books. She delivered around 20 invited and guest lectures as the resource person in refresher courses, seminars, conferences, and workshops. She presented more than 30 research papers in seminars, workshops, and conferences. She did a research project on a compilation of theoretical debates on caste and gender in Telugu, undertaken in collaboration with TISS Hyderabad. She received many fellowships and distinctions. She received International Dissertation Research Fellowship awarded by the Social Science Research Council USA for the year 2002-2003. She also received Columbia Traveling Fellowship awarded by Columbia University for the year 2002-2003. Columbia University Fellowship for 4 years starting from 1999 to pursue doctoral studies in the Anthropology Department, Columbia University. Columbia University Dean's Summer Research Fellowship she got in 2000. And she was also awarded UGC Net Fellowship in 1996. And she got a gold medal in MA from University of Hyderabad. Apart from these, she made presentations at the discussions on her books. She was a speaker in panel discussions. She organized screening of films. She was the resource person at the South Asia Conference on Higher Education, organized by the Ford Foundation and the Higher Education Innovation and Research Applications, Bangalore. She has been teaching a wide variety of areas and topics, ranging from cultural studies, gender issues to modernity for MPhil and MA students. Under her research supervision, 1 MPhil and 2 PhDs were already awarded and 1 PhD dissertation submitted and 4 ongoing PhD projects. She is the executive member of Anveshi Research Center for Women's Studies, Hyderabad, since 2011. She held numerous teaching and research positions earlier. She was a research fellow at Anveshi Research Center for Women's Studies, Hyderabad from 2005 to 2006. And she was also research and teaching assistant at the Department of Anthropology, Columbia University from 1999 to 2002, research coordinator for the project Telugu Cinema, History, Culture, Theory, undertaken jointly by Anveshi Research Center for Women's Studies and the Center for the Study of Culture and Society, Bangalore. She was also research assistant at the Center for the Study of Culture and Society, Bangalore, for the project Gender, Media and Modernity, 1950-2000. From 1998 to 1999, she worked as a lecturer in English at St. Anne's Degree College, Hyderabad in 1997. And she also worked as an associate lecturer in English at the Government Polytechnic for Women, Suryapet, from 1995 to 96. We are really glad to have you, ma'am, as the speaker for this session. I now invite Dr. Uma Maheshwari Brugubanda to speak on doing cultural studies in India. Please, ma'am.
Um, am I visible and audible to everyone?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, Uma. Yes, Uma.
Ma'am, thank you so much for that very kind, very generous, and a bit embarrassingly long introduction. I don't think that all that detail was necessary, but I thank you. My heartfelt thanks to you. But I want to begin by saying that it's a very great pleasure for me to be giving this lecture. I mean, I would have liked a face-to-face, you know, actual physical lecture in Maristella College, but that was not to be. But thanks to this crisis, at least I'm speaking to you all through this webinar. I want to place on record my gratitude. I studied both my intermediate, I did my both my intermediate and my BA education in Maristella College, and those 5 years were a wonderful time that I had. I'm ever so grateful to all my teachers there. You know, all my the history, political science, English teachers, and I want to especially say that. My English department teachers, so many of them I remember so fondly, Mrs. Ebenezer, Mrs. Sandhya, both the Sandhyas. And especially I owe a special debt of gratitude to Dr. Girija Nambiar, who was such a wonderful guide and friend during those years. And it is thanks to her that I went on to do my MA and MPhil English Literature in University of Hyderabad. And Dr. Satya Sudha had just joined. I think the year I was leaving, she joined as a very young faculty at that time. So I'm really thankful to her for inviting me to give this lecture. So it's indeed a great pleasure. But without further ado, I want to start my lecture. So I teach in a department of cultural studies, and there are a number of English departments now um, that are offering papers on cultural studies. I do not know if Maristella is doing that yet. But if it is not, I hope it gets introduced in the future. There is a new interest in cultural studies because recently it has become one of the subjects in the UGC NET exam. So there is now, you know, a lot of demand. But I think cultural studies as a field has much more to it than just being a topic for the UGC NET exam. And I hope that this lecture will be able to, you know, give you some sense of that field. Now, I'm aware that in a webinar like this, what happens is that there are a number of participants and good morning to you all and thank you for listening. But one disadvantage is that I cannot see you and I do not know who you are. So our session cannot be interactive. I would have preferred, you know, to know how many of you are familiar, have some, you know, knowledge of the field. But given this format, that is not possible. Of course, there is some time for interaction in the end, and I'm hoping to answer, you know, your questions and queries at that point. But so I am going to assume that most of you do not know much about the field. So it's going to be an introduction to the field of cultural studies, as well as then thinking about some preliminary introduction to and thoughts about how do we do cultural studies in our context, in the Indian context. So that those are the two parts of my lecture. Okay, so let me start my PowerPoint. You know, just give me a minute. Okay. Can you see my screen now? I'm hoping that you can.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah. So, doing cultural studies in India, uh, why doing and why not studying? Or because cultural studies is a practice. It's not just one more discipline that we study and get our degrees in and do some research, but it is a practice. It is both an intellectual and a political practice. And what do we mean by that? That I hope to elucidate as we go along. So, doing cultural studies in India is the title that I've given to my lecture. The India part I will come to in the second part of the lecture. Mm. But for now, let me just look at the time. Okay. So I will take roughly half an hour so that, and if maybe like 35 minutes or so that we have enough time for discussion. Um, so cultural studies, but then what is culture? Now, when we say culture, often we think of dance, music, the arts. And often when I tell people I'm teaching in this Department of Cultural Studies, so they ask me whether I teach dance or music or painting. These are the things that come to, or sometimes when we think of culture, we think of our festivals, of our folk songs, or so culture is a very, very broad term. But what is culture in cultural studies? Now it has a more specific um, meaning and history, and the way it has developed as a concept that became the object of study in cultural studies is a very interesting and fascinating history, and I want us to think about that a little bit. So, before cultural studies, in the English literary studies, all of you, most of you are English literature teachers, so these names are very familiar to you, Matthew Arnold and F.R. Lewis. So, there was a thinking that the culture is a kind of a bulwark against barbarity. It was a bulwark against the collapse of civilization. It helped us. It is the girdle. It is, religion and culture were the girdle that held society together. So these were some of the ideas, and definitely the culture invoked here was very much high culture. That is the best that is said and thought in poetry, in novels, or so the idea there was an idea of high culture. Now, as all of you again know, that Arnold was very much worried about the assaults on this high culture by the Hyde Park demonstrators and so on. I won't go into that history. But so that was one of the ideas of culture that was prevalent at that time and I'm talking about British society. And on the other hand, there was the idea of culture drawn from the discipline of anthropology, which was, has a much longer history. Now, in the anthropological tradition, culture was a whole way of life. That is different societies. All societies had a culture, and it is according to that culture that that culture determined their food habits, their ways of dressing, their marriage customs, their kinship networks. So there was that very broad idea of culture which encompassed everything, and then there was the Arnold Lewis kind of tradition on the other. Now, what cultural studies, which began, you could trace back its history to the 1950s and 60s in Britain. Now, what it proposed was that with the post-war capitalist societies, where in Britain itself there was a growing affluence, the middle class was growing, the previously existing class structures were changing. So this meant that there was a churning of society going on. And in addition to that, there were a number of, mass audiovisual mediums that were becoming popular, and they were competing with the print. And those were the cinema, television. Certainly by the 1950s became big in Britain. So you had the cinema on the one hand, television, then popular print magazines and popular pulp fiction. So how do you think of all these? You know, is there a way of critically thinking about both the economic and political changes on the one hand, and the new changes being introduced and being reflected in the mass media? So these were the two objects of study that cultural studies took up. But when I say cultural studies, who are the people I have in mind? Where did it start? And some of you might be aware of this history, but for those of you who are not aware of that, it is well worth going over that. So what is popularly called now the Birmingham Center. So that's where you go back to the beginnings of cultural studies. Richard Hogarth. So one of the classics, sort of founding classics, if you like, of cultural studies was the book written by Richard Hogarth in 1957 called The Uses of Literacy, Aspects of Working Class Life. Now, as Stuart Hall, who was a scholar who came much later and took over from Richard Hogarth, says, the uses of literacy was an excellent ethnography of working class British life. Now, Hogarth, who himself came from that background, described the ways in which the working class lived, the communities they formed, the way they supported each other, and the how with the growing industrialization and capitalism, that kind of working class life was being destroyed with the coming of mass media. Okay, with the coming of mass media and with the growing sort of capitalist consumer culture. Now, along with Richard Hogarth, there are two other figures who, you could say that these were the, again, founding figures of cultural studies. One was E.P. Thompson, whose classic study, again, of the English working class is called The Making of the English Working Class. And here also, again, he said that I wanted to bring into history. Now, Dr. Rosetta Joseph was talking yesterday, and I was glad that her lecture came before mine, because she was talking about history from the margins and how literature can function as a history from the margins. So now what you had, like what Hogarth and Thompson and Raymond Williams, who came later, what they were trying to propose was, how do we make the voice of the working classes be heard? How do we make a claim for their culture? How do we make their culture also count as culture with the capital C? Now, culture with the capital C earlier excluded all of these people. They did not have a place when you described what was British culture. But now their effort was to bring in, this working class life and working class culture into visibility, and use that as a way to study the new changes occurring in British culture. So you can say that their works were and the Birmingham Center, Richard Hogarth set up what was called the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies at the Birmingham University, and that subsequently came to be known as the Birmingham Center for Cultural Studies. And all of these intellectuals were part of a formation that is now broadly, and they themselves actually called themselves the New Left. Why the New Left? Because a lot of them were drawing inspiration from Marxist thinking, but they were also distancing themselves from the Marxist, very rigid, and mechanical ways of applying Marx's ideas of base and superstructure. Because the earlier rigid Marxists felt that any changes in the base, that is the economic modes of production, would automatically lead to changes in the cultural field. Now, the New Left did not dispute the fact that there was a relation between economy, politics, and culture, but they said that this did not happen in a mechanical way, and the economy did not fully determine the kinds of cultural changes that come about. In fact, they said that we have to re-theorize this relation between economy and culture. So, economy, culture, politics. So, this was the triangle with which this New Left worked, but it did not want to decide beforehand how culture was. They did not say that capitalist culture will go in this one direction, or this is what it will look like. They did not make the kind of predictions, and they did not work with the kind of rigid certainties that the old left worked with. So in that sense, they were trying to develop a more supple kind of Marxist framework, for which the work of this Italian thinker Antonio Gramsci, and whose ideas of hegemony and the building a common sense, his ideas of the national popular, these were very useful theoretical tools that they began to draw on. But before I go on to and discuss some of those aspects, I have something here on this slide which may have which you may have noticed, called "Culture is Ordinary." Now, why do I have that in bold? Because actually, it is a phrase taken. It was the title of one of Raymond Williams's essays, "Culture is Ordinary," where he talks about his own experience of going to Oxford. And he says that the learning there did not, did not scare him. But what scared him was the tea room, where the Oxford tea room, where all the elite of English society gathered and were very much wary of letting the working class students come in and be part of their society. So he says that the working class people felt more discriminated in the tea room rather than the classroom. The classroom, somehow, his love of learning impelled him into the classroom, but it was in the tea room that he felt. And so for him, that idea of culture then had to be dismantled from this. It was not the culture of the elite, but the culture of his own working class background, where he felt that there were community ties, there was a very rich cultural life that was part of the British working class communities. So then he expanded this idea of culture, and in some ways that very broad understanding of popular culture, of mass culture, is what is at the heart of cultural studies as a field of study. Let me move on to the next slide. Stuart Hall, again, some of you may have heard his name. He took over from Richard Hogarth as the director of the Birmingham Center, and he served from 1969 to 1980. And I mean, of course, to go back, let me go back to my earlier slide. Among the works of Raymond Williams that I have listed here, Culture and Society, The Long Revolution, keywords. Keywords is still very much used across the world in, among his other works, of course. It is one of the primary textbooks, if you like, of cultural studies. And why is that so? For those of you who are not familiar with keywords, what Raymond Williams did here was he took several terms, several critical concepts, like aesthetics, like culture itself, the word civilization, bourgeois, class, race. No, race did not figure in Williams's work. It comes much later. But several terms about which people thought they knew the meanings of. And what he did was he did a very elaborate and thorough etymological history of these words to show how these words, what they meant in the beginning, and then how they changed over time, how they acquired the current meanings that they did. And what was the necessity of this enterprise? Why was it such a critical importance? The reason was, what Raymond Williams showed was that words have histories, concepts have histories. And once we familiarize ourselves with these histories that concepts and words have, we will be in a position to see how they have acquired this meaning. And we will also be in a position to put them to new uses. We will be able to shift the direction of these meanings in a new way. So that is where then as I said before, they started to look for new theoretical tools to do this work. Okay. And some of those new theoretical tools were drawn from the new theories that were coming up in the field of language, in the field of linguistics. And it was here that Saussure's work, that is Saussure's work on language, which said that all language is a signifying system. Now, until until then, language was seen more or less, in a broad sense, as a medium that transparently reflected the thoughts and ideas of the speaker. So today when I'm speaking to you, there are some thoughts in my mind and I am communicating them through you through this English language. But I could do the same with in Telugu or in Hindi or any other language. So language itself, that medium did not matter, right? The medium did not matter. Whereas what Saussure said, and subsequent theorists who drew upon Saussure and developed what they said, that in fact that medium determines what you are able to say and what you're not able to say, which means that it is not that we use language in a simple and transparent way, but language conditions us. Language allows us to say some things, language disallows us also. It prevents us from saying. Therefore, the key theoretical term then became representation, which meant that different, whether it's a literary text, or whether it's a film text, or a television show, or even a news program, used language in particular ways, was a certain representation of reality. It was not, it did not simply transparently reflect reality or channel reality and bring it to you. Rather, it was a particular representation, which means which employed certain signs. Because what Saussure said was language is a system of signs, and every sign can be broken up into the signifier and the signified. I don't know, given the limited time, I don't want to go into that. But basically, what it said was that language meaning is produced through the difference among signs. A chair is a chair, not because there's some intrinsic quality. It is different from a table. That's why it is a chair. A bottle is, and he also proposed that the signifier, that is the word chair, refers to the signified, that is the object chair, but there is no necessary natural correlation between the two. That was one of the important theoretical breakthroughs here, which meant that every text that we study then had to be seen as a tissue of signs, a putting together of different signs to produce certain kinds of meanings, which is why one of the important essays that Stuart Hall wrote was called Encoding and Decoding. That is, in every cultural text, whether it is a novel, a poem, a film show, or a news program, there are certain meanings that are embedded, they're encoded, and the viewer or the reader then decodes them. So there is a whole process, a circuit through which meaning is produced. And this is how so culture itself is a system of signs, if you like. So that was one of the major theoretical advancements made. And within this, then, because of their initial Marxist preoccupations then, and thinking about inequalities, that is class inequalities in society, one of the things they tried to then think about is that how is consent produced in society? How do people, whether it is women are subordinate to men, or the working classes to the propertied classes, how is it that consent is secured? How do we do things which we know sometimes go against our own interests, but sometimes we don't even recognize that sometimes we don't even recognize that we are in a system of subordination, that is, we are being marginalized or we're being made subaltern. So how does this work? So to that they turn to these ideas of ideology and hegemony. Now again, because I could do a whole 2 hours on these concepts, or more, a whole series of lectures, but let me just say that why these were important for understanding culture is that they propose that a lot of cultural institutions, not just film and literature and so on, but cultural institutions like the institution of marriage, let us say, uh, or structures of the law, or education, that is schooling. All of these propose certain ideas, and it is through these ideas that order in society is maintained. what is right and what is wrong is maintained. And for that, Gramsci, the Italian Marxist thinker, proposed that it is not only through domination, that is the use of physical force and suppression, that people, do what they do. Also, they often do it because they believe this is the right thing. They also do it because this is the natural order of things, or this is how society should be organized. So when women accept that, or used to accept, they no longer do, that their primary role was to be mothers and wives and to be homemakers, they were in fact being guided by the prevalent ideologies of that time. That is the prevalent thinking, the discourse around what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a mother. So the hegemony then, that is the consent then, was secured through creating these ideas, which allowed what Gramsci called a common sense. That is, you believe that this is how it is. Of course, women have to do this. Of course, they shouldn't go out to work. Who will take care of the children? Who will cook for the husband? Right? So there was a dominant common sense to which everybody agreed, and this common sense came to us through a number of cultural institutions. It came to us through religion, it came to us through morality, it came to us through law, through education. So then the job of cultural studies became to unpack these, to say that how is it that this dominant common sense has been put in place? What are the tools through which it has been done? So once you have this, this idea of looking at language as a system of science, then you can see how it is put together, and then you can unpack it. You can sort of price it open and see if you can rebuild it in a different way, whether you can change the existing social order. Therefore, then the objects of cultural studies. Now, for literary studies, as you know, the literary text has been central. Even today, we have added new literatures. So the old English literature, which used to be only about British literature, slowly we added American literature, we added Canadian, we added, this new thing called post-colonial literature. We started adding Indian writing in English, and later Indian writing through translation, we brought it into English. So now we have Dalit literature, women's literature. So, but literature, that object has remained the same. But what cultural studies does is also it brings in new objects for study. Okay, I'll come back to this. Maybe, okay, let me stay with this. So what it does is it begins to make the focus of its study popular literature, popular television, popular cinema, because what it aims to do is to understand how are the dominant ideas, the ideas which are circulating, discourses about everything from how should a working class man behave, how should a woman behave, what are the ideas that are permitted for for children, all these kinds of things. Because it wanted to study, it expanded the scope of what it studied. So the objects then, to go back, like I said, television, news, everything, all these became objects of study. So a whole new array of objects came to be studied in cultural studies. What is this policing the crisis? In fact, this is one of the major works that Stuart Hall and his colleagues did in the 80s when Margaret Thatcher came to power. So one of the things that Stuart Hall says is that that cultural studies is not merely a new discipline which you add to the existing disciplines. Neither is it a purely intellectual enterprise. For him, it was as much a political project, a cultural project, as it was an intellectual project. And why is this so? For him, what cultural studies did is to study culture in different conjunctures, what he called conjunctures. That is, the coming together of a certain kind of economic logic, a certain kind of political system, a certain form of the state, and different mediums like the mass mediums, new technologies through which culture began to be produced. So all these together are what he called a new conjuncture. So in the 80s in Britain, in the 70s, late 70s and 80s, what was the new conjuncture? It was the now spread of mass print, of course, but also television and cinema, but also the coming of the ideas of free market, neoliberalism, and the dismantling of the British welfare state. So Margaret Thatcher is supposed to have famously remarked that there is no society, there are only individuals, and therefore each individuals within the space of the free market will try to better himself, better his life, and move forward. And that is when what Hall and his colleagues identified as, they said that what you have here in the, and it was not just in Britain, but with Ronald Reagan in America, Thatcher in Britain, and but several other leaders in Europe, they identified what they saw as the rise of what they called authoritarian populism. That is, leaders who were very popular, who were actually elected through the democratic process. So you could not say that they were dictators, but they used this popular mandate that they won through elections to rule in an authoritarian way. Okay, and then so one of the projects that Stuart Hall and his colleagues took up was, how is it that our cultural productions, whether it is television shows or films, or how are they supporting and largely keeping in place this kind of an authoritarian populism, or are there also marginal and subcultures that are trying to raise a voice against it, that are trying to work against this dominant logic? So that, therefore, for them, culture came to be seen not as something that is to be preserved, oh, this is our culture, we have to preserve it, and so on, but culture is a site of struggle, culture as something that is modern, culture as something that is ongoing, a space of negotiation. And that is where the whole thing, the question of power becomes very, very central. The question of power in thinking, who produces culture? Hmm? Who are the producers? For whose consumption is it produced? Are all readers and viewers of television shows and viewers of cinema just passive consumers, or do they have a do they interpret things differently? Do different people read the same text differently? Then what are the different kinds of readings? How do we understand them? And in all of this, how does the question of power operate? If there is one thing that distinguishes cultural studies from other kinds of purely intellectual disciplines, it is this focus on the question of power. But it was not simply that old left question which said simply that, oh, the ruling classes, they have the power, they are the oppressors, the working classes are the victims. No, not that idea. But what is happening in the changes that are coming about it? So they tried to give a far more complex, idea about how change is happening in society. Mm. So with Stuart Hall, and Hall himself, some of you may or may not know, was of Jamaican origin. So he was a Black Britisher. And so naturally he had a very critical interest in race. So one of the things that the later work at the Birmingham Center happened was when it took on these questions of gender and race, and it moved beyond simply the framework of class. So there was a lot of very interesting and useful work. Some of you may want to further pursue it and go back and read. There was the work on popular novels and magazines for women, on soap operas, the work of scholars like Angela McRobbie, Charlotte Brunson, and then Hall himself on trying to think about what does it mean to be a Black person in Britain, thinking about racism. So among his many works, one of the essays that I would highly recommend you read is, he says, what is this Black in Black popular culture? Some of you might know, that especially music and dance was a very vibrant kind of space in which Black Britishers, expressed themselves. There was a vibrant kind of subculture being. So then he asks, what does it mean to be Black? Is this a stable kind of identity? Is it a racial identity? He says, no. there is nothing naturalized or essential about being black. Actually, you become black only when you are in a white society. That it is only against, if you go back to that Saussures idea of meaning being produced through difference, you become black only when in relation to a white person, right? Among your own people, that is among blacks, there is no difference. You are not a right? It is only through difference. You become Indian only in relation to a Pakistani or Bangladeshi. Within India, you might describe yourself differently. So identity is always about difference. I am Telugu because I am not Tamilian or Bengali or something else. Huh? I am Hindu because I'm not Muslim or Christian. Or so all of us, our identities are created through difference, and they are created in particular social, political, and historical contexts. So one of the big achievements of cultural studies is to move away from this naturalized, essentialized understanding of identities to thinking about identities as also having history, identities also as having politics. So one of the important works then was that I just want to mention, obviously no time to go into, but was by Paul Gilroy, called "There Ain't No Black in the Union Jack." The Union Jack, as you know, is the British flag. And he said, there ain't no black. That is, in the dominant representations of what it means to be British, of British life, British society, black people had no place. And we know by the recent events in America, the George Floyd moment, as it is being called, we know that the question of race is still a burning one, both in the US and the UK, and in Europe in general. But I see that I'm running out of time. I will just take another 10 minutes. Ma'am, is that okay? Is that fine?
Yeah.
Sir?
Okay. Okay, Uma.
Okay, just 10 minutes, right? Yeah. Okay. So then we come to, so having given you that sort of rather brief and breathless kind of history of cultural studies in Britain, so then we have to think about, how do we do cultural studies in India? Is it simply another thing like all our disciplines being imported from the West? Is this one more new, fashionable thing that has come here and we study it? And just as we sort of read Shakespeare and Chaucer and Eliot, do we now read, Williams and Stuart Hall? And, are these our new gods after having displaced the old pantheon? Not really. Though we do acknowledge and learn from and draw upon the theoretical resources of, cultural studies that has been done in Britain or in the US or elsewhere, we have to think about, how do we do cultural studies in the Indian context? That is, we have to chart our own genealogy, and we have to think what is our current conjuncture in which we are now going back and asking questions about our own culture. So that question which I started, the first slide, what is culture, has to be posed again in our own context. So in our context, who defines Indian culture? Whose culture is presented as Indian culture? And who does it leave out and who does it foreground? Is tribal culture Indian culture? Is Christian culture Indian culture? Is South Asian Sufi culture, Indian culture? Or is Indian? Often, of course, we say unity in diversity and all that. But very often then, many things are left out. That is, there are several exclusions in order to produce this one single idea of Indian culture and Indian heritage. So therefore we have to then think of the politics behind this, we have to think of the power equations behind this, and then within this context, how do we conduct cultural studies? So to think briefly about our own genealogy then, in the 90s, the crisis in English studies, just when I finished my BA at Maristella and went to the University of Hyderabad, everybody was saying there was a crisis in English studies. Why? Because suddenly people were asking, after so many years of freeing ourselves from colonial rule, why are we still only reading, the classic, the canon? What about our own literature? How what is the place of English in our society? How come we are still, why is English still the language of power? So there were many interesting questions that were thrown up during that crisis. And following a parallel movement in the field of historiography, which Dr. Rosetta mentioned yesterday, was the subaltern studies group of historians who began to ask, how is history written? Earlier, when the British colonizer was in power, it was written using a colonial framework. Later, when India became independent, it was the nationalist framework. So, in all these, where are the voices from the margins? Where are the voices of women? Where are the voices of tribals? Where are the voices of peasants? How do we retrieve these voices? How can we make the subaltern speak? Even if the subaltern speaks, are we trained to hear? Are we willing to listen? So these were some of the questions that they threw up. And of course, then, the women's and the Dalit Bahujan movements, and in the 90s, what is also called the crisis in secularism, when caste and this question of religious community became big political important questions. So all these actually changed the Indian academy in very many new ways. They actually shook the foundations of the way in which disciplines were being taught, they were being reproduced, knowledge was being produced in Indian universities. And along with that, of course, is the bigger, larger context of globalization, liberalization, privatization. So if this is the conjuncture, this is the political, economic, intellectual, cultural conjuncture that we find ourselves in, how do we, study our culture? This becomes, our point of departure. So therefore, then what we have in cultural studies is that we are not only looking at new objects, that is the focus on popular cinema, therefore to see how are dominant ideas produced in our society. And what better institution to study that than in cinema? Because earlier, in a way, we had a sort of an elite disdain for popular cinema. It's horrible, it's terrible. Of course, we like to study our Satyajit Ray and Mrinal Sen, and but we didn't care much for popular cinema, though many of us enjoyed it. We are big fans of film music. We have our own favorite stars, and uh, but the reason we turned to the study of popular cinema is that to understand why is it so popular, what makes it so popular. So both to critique it, to redeem elements from it which might signal, a new way of thinking, but also to take it very seriously as an object for academic study. That was one of the new things that happened in the in the Indian context. Then, of course, the focus on television, popular print media, and now new social media. So, what we are doing today in my own department, my own work, and the work of my colleagues and several others is that to look at popular culture as a site of power and contestation, to read these new objects as reflecting the times in which we are, and as representations of the dilemmas that our society is undergoing as it wrestles to become more democratic, as it wrestles with the idea of political equality on the one hand, but existing and continuing social and economic inequalities. So it is in this tussle that new cultural products are being produced and negotiated. So it is in some ways it is an exhilarating kind of project to be studying culture today in India, because it is very challenging, but also in many ways most productive and instructive. Um, shall I stop there so that if there are questions and more concrete examples and so on that I can bring up during the question answer session? I will stop there, and once again thank the organizers and Sudha ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uma. It was highly intellectual. The lecture, you have traced the genealogy of culture, and you have given us an insight into Indian culture too. I request participants to come up with their queries. You can type it out, or you can just unmute your audio and ask questions.
Did I pack in too much in a very short time? Was it?
No, Dr. Uma,
Yeah.
popular cinema or popular music is misunderstood, I think, by Indian audiences or spectators, whatever. What do you say?
Why do you say that, ma'am?
No, and
What do
very
you mean?
few people, I think, in India, maybe only the educated, the elite have heard of Satyajit Ray or Mrinal Sen. Yeah, no, it's mostly the commercial films are,
Hmm.
box office hits and all that.
Right, right. No, exactly, ma'am. So the thing is, the what is called the art cinema or the parallel cinema, first of all, has very limited viewership. Hmm?
Yeah.
And whereas the large number of
Yes.
people in India watch commercial cinema.
Yes.
So if we want to understand, how culture is being shaped today, if
Yeah.
we ignore that popular cinema, then we risk sort of ignoring a very influential institution.
Yes.
Therefore, in order to understand and critique popular culture, we must pay attention to popular cultural cinema. And in fact, it is there that when new trends come in, they will bring about some change because they reach out to a large number of people.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And see, even for most people, music also is popular film music. Even
Yes.
earlier
Yeah.
generations,
Yes.
through the radio and through cassettes and so on, what we heard and enjoyed was film music. Say, only some people had access to, say, Hindustani classical or Carnatic classical. Or they,
Yes.
they, they
Yes.
did not have they were not
Yes.
equipped to appreciate it.
Yes. But what lives on is like
Hello.
the elite culture. Yeah, there's a speaker, Uma.
Yeah.
Hello, Dr. Uma. I'm Dr. Sharda Palkurti from Warangal,
Hello,
working
ma'am.
in a tribal welfare institution, ma'am, in a degree
Ah,
college.
okay,
So,
okay.
first of all, let me congratulate because you have dealt a topic which actually many of us would love to bring it into our classrooms. Because, as we know, popular cinema is one thing that we use it as an aid
Hmm.
to bring kind of activities in the classrooms or engage students. But most of the times we fail it to make it a very systematic study which can bring cultural awareness or cultural integrity or the information across the students. So ma'am, is it possible for us to have, like, I know you were part of gender sensitization team, the course which has been for engineering students, can
Yes.
we bring something for the university undergraduate courses where we have this cultural studies also as a paper where literature, most of the times we feel like uh, we do our literature course and all in our PJ and all, but we end up only talking about communication skills and all that peripheral things which does not have any great, role to play. I mean, that's my personal opinion.
Hello, Dr. Sharda.
Yes, ma'am.
Huh.
So, can we have that kind of thing coming into, people like you, if you can think about it and, make a cultural studies also a part, cultural and gender studies, because your talk has made me, kind of reflection. Though we say that most of us keep it aside, we bring popular cinema into our classrooms invariably to engage our students. The best way to connect to the present generation is only through medium of movies.
Yes. See, there's no escaping cinema. If you live in India, how can you escape?
Exactly, ma'am.
Ubiquitous.
Exactly.
But therefore, because it is so popular and it is so influential, we should be able to look at it critically. We should develop some theoretical tools which will allow us to critique it, which will allow us to, think about it in an intelligent way without discounting its popularity. How can we bring about critical discussions around it? So that is very important, and I would be glad to help in any way. I mean, introduce so that gender textbook that I worked on, that is available, and though it is compulsory only for the JNTU affiliated colleges, it can be used. I know that many friends in different parts of the country have been using chapters from that book in their own classes. So you can do that, but especially the theoretical tools necessary for thinking about popular cinema, I think that cultural studies offers. It would be good to introduce it at the undergraduate
Yeah,
level. I agree.
yeah.
Hopefully, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharda.
It's a very interesting subject, Uma, Dr. Uma, this culture studies. Now there
Ma'am,
is
you call
one.
me Uma, no need to call me doctor.
It's okay for this webinar.
Yeah.
Now there's a question from one of our students.
Sure.
She's asking, can you please tell me the impact of culture studies on our degrees or our studies? Studies, she means her education.
I didn't get the question. You mean?
She says, what is the effect of culture studies on the Indian culture and how do they impact our studies?
See, one of the objectives of our own, say, MA program in cultural studies is to give students a set of a new perspective on how to think about culture, and also equip them with a new theories that will allow them to think about India and Indian culture in a new way, not from a sort of a dominant but to bring in this question of power, to ask, to allow them to see who is producing for whose consumption, who is speaking for whom, who represents whom. See, this idea of representation is a very interesting idea, because it both means political representation, as in, when we there are elections and you elect somebody to be your political representative, but representation in the cultural sense. That is, now many literature students also do this, as research. How are women represented in this film? How are tribals represented there? What are the way in which Muslims are represented? So all of these, you will see that, in fact, these are kind of cultural studies questions that have sort of come back into the literature classroom. And they are asking, so now there's question of who is talking for whom, and what does that representing somebody involve? Is it a fair representation? So those questions of power are also being asked, which means that you are actually democratizing society. Because what is democracy after all? Everybody enjoys equal rights. One man, one vote, right? So that to take your place in, to actually have your voice be heard, is a democracy. So in that sense, you could say that cultural studies is a project that wants to enrich, to support democracy and democratic culture. There are some questions coming up in the chat thing. Should I try and answer them, or Sudha ma'am?
You can answer, Uma, if you can see
Yeah.
the
ma'am.
Yeah, I can hear somebody's voice.
Can I ask?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah. Yes, can I?
She will see and answer.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, I can hear somebody's voice. Can you go ahead and ask your question? Then I will go to the ones in the chat.
Okay, fine. Okay, then a very good morning. I'm Dr. Akhtar Banu, Government Degree College for Men, Kurnool.
Hello, doctor.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah. Really a very interesting session, intellectually stimulating session, I can say.
Thank you.
More than a question, more than a question, I'm impressed with your idea that women accept that their primary duty very heartily, and this is in line with the article that I read yesterday. Dean of Graduate Studies writes an article that in these 2 months, in the last 2 months during these COVID times, the research output of women has come down drastically.
Yes.
Because they accept their roles, the primary roles. So when you said that article which I read yesterday came to mind, and that really tells that how women accept their primary responsibility very happily, and the other things come to their mind next.
Yes,
That's what.
yes,
And really a
absolutely.
very good session. Yeah.
Yeah,
Very,
thanks for
very
that
interesting.
observation.
Yeah, very good and interesting session, ma'am. And still, what I believe is still women have to strike a balance.
Everybody has to strike a balance, everybody in the family,
Yeah.
not just women.
Yes, everyone. Yes. Yeah, everyone.
See,
Correct, exactly.
yeah, because see, when the woman has, working as much as an earning member, um,
Yeah.
there everybody has to share. And even if she is not, as earlier we used to say
Yes.
housewife, now we say homemaker. But whatever it is,
Yeah.
the terminology has changed. But one of the things we say in our gender textbook is how women's work is so invisible. It becomes visible
Yeah.
only when you don't do it. As long as you're doing it
Correct.
and everything is running smoothly, in fact nobody even
Yes.
notices it. It's not appreciated.
Really. Really. Yes, yes.
So
Good.
yeah, okay, I'm
That's
trying to
really
see if there are some hello.
thank.
I can
Yeah.
see. I, I'm trying to see if there are questions in the chat box which I can
Fine,
answer.
fine, madam.
Yeah,
Go ahead, ma'am.
yeah,
Thank you. Then.
thanks.
Correct.
Yeah, there are questions in the chat
Yeah,
box. You can
yeah.
carry on, Doctor.
One by Bhargavi Tondapu. Ma'am, these days modern art is trying to shatter the barriers and large number of poets drawn towards poetry, mic sessions, and new age shows. And we see that the audience is surely influencing the way cinema is representing culture. Okay, if I understand this question rightly, the eruption of social media, YouTube, the way the mobile has become a camera which everybody can then produce some, they can sing and upload their videos, jokes, and so there is a whole new field has emerged with social media, which again cultural studies ought to be very much interested, and we are trying to engage with these new technologies. So there is a new paradigm shift now with the coming of digital technology, with the coming of the mobile phones, the smartphones. I mean, even this whole webinar is an example of the new changes in technology. So we have, of course, we have to study them. We have to study them carefully. But again, it should be one is, of course, some of those old questions are very much relevant here. Again, access, who has access to, because even with the online learning, a very major concern is the question of the digital divide. How many people can access this? If we want to do a major part of our teaching online, how many students will be left out because of that? And is the mobile phone enough of a device for online teaching and learning? Obviously not. You should have access to internet, you should have access to a laptop, a printer, a scanner, so many things. Even I think we as teachers are struggling to adjust to this. So what about the students, and what about those who cannot afford many of those? So again, even as we think about new technologies, new modes of cultural production, some of those old questions are very much relevant. But then we also have to think about what new kinds of social life are these new technologies enabling, or how is social life itself being changed by these technologies? Those would be, I think, some of the questions. To quickly move on to forms of culture, Krishna Sri Erramalli, there's another question. These days, yeah, films and television are the hardest hit in this pandemic. How to deal with it to save the culture? Well, this is a new crisis. So for the film and television industry itself is trying to, deal with in its own way. Recently, the government has given permission for shootings to resume, though I don't know how safe that is. But again, we have to wait and see. It's too early to say what kind of long-term changes the pandemic will bring. One thing is to observe, to collect information, to see, what changes come about. Then we have to think about, will our old theories and old ideas, will they serve us well in our attempts to think about these new forms? Again, I will say that we will have to uh, seriously think about those things. Wait and watch is what I would say. Um, Are there any more questions in the
Yes,
chat?
one more, Dr. Uma.
Yeah.
Narinya Francis says, she's an
Yes.
assistant professor
Yeah.
at St. Paul's, Bangalore.
Ha.
She says,
Okay,
how
yes.
do we ensure histories are included in academic discourses as they are a valuable resource for culture studies?
Yeah. No, in fact, there was no time, but I wanted to read a quote from Stuart Hall where he says that cultural studies is not a new discipline, rather, it is an interdisciplinary field. So, like I said, the changes in historiography, the new questions that are being asked about the writing of history itself. So, when women begin to write histories, right? Or when hitherto excluded castes begin to tell their own stories. And you will see that in many of the social movements, and this happens across the world, the first thing that comes out is literature, right? Because existing histories have not told those stories. These marginalized people, whether it is women or Dalit Bahujans or Muslims or other kinds of minority not just in terms of numbers but minority in terms of the power relations. That is, you may have many numbers but you are powerless in terms of the power hierarchies that exist. So when these people actually begin to produce writing, this challenges existing histories, existing ideas of literature, and so on. So definitely cultural studies has to draw from political theory, it has to draw from the discipline of history, even as its own theories have actually shaped the questions that are being asked in these older and traditional disciplines as well. See, today in the history departments, people are working on cinema. They are seeing it as then so many changes have come about. So I would say that today there is a lot of interdisciplinary kind of borrowing. So disciplines are not watertight compartments. Does that answer your question? I
Excuse me,
hope.
ma'am. Here is a query from Ajit T.
I'm not able to hear.
One more query, ma'am.
Yeah.
From Ajit T. Today, where do we stand in cultural studies related to Syed's Orientalism?
Orientalism. Okay. Well, yes, Syed's book Orientalism, many of you may be familiar with it, was a very important text for post-colonial thinking, and for the project of subaltern studies historiography as well. So in some ways, those kinds of, thinking about, from the Eurocentric point of view, to look at Europe as was very much there. It is on the decline, but in some ways, because of the economic, political, and financial power wielded by the West, it is able to dictate to many other countries. It's able to shape the foreign policies. So, in that sense, that imperial project continues in many ways, but we also have to be careful not to blame everything uh, for all the whatever is happening, the crisis in our society. We cannot just blame the British or imperial, but we also have to take responsibility and to see the complex ways in which those power hierarchies work with our own local societal power hierarchies. So sometimes, those the capitalists here are quite comfortable working with the capitalists from the West. How do they both come together to say take up mining in some tribal area, and then they destroy the kind of way of life that is there? Yesterday, Professor Parvati was talking about how we don't talk enough about the environment and ecology. So there are so many questions that one can think about. But Syed remains important and relevant, but also one has to seriously think about what it means to be in the new millennium, in the 2000s. How have power equations changed?
Thank you, Dr. Uma, for your very wonderful interactive session too. So can we go over to Sri Indraganti Mohan Krishna.
Definitely.
Thank you very much for your
Thank
very
you.
highly intellectual and academic lecture.
I hope it
Thank
was
you.
also clear
Yes,
and
and it was very clear. It was very clear.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
ma'am.
so much.
Thank you to
Thank you
all the
so much.
participants and to you, Sudha ma'am, once again.
Welcome.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Yeah. With thanks to Dr. Uma Brugubanda, we now move over to Sri Mohan Krishna Indraganti. Sri Mohan Krishna is a film director and screenwriter known for his works predominantly in Telugu cinema. His debut directorial venture, Grahanam, which was released in 2005, fetched him 11 awards, including the National Film Award, the Nandi Award, and the Gollapudi Srinivas Award for the best first film of a director. The film was also showcased in the Indian Panorama section of the 2005 International Film Festival of India. His films are enjoyed by audiences in India and abroad. Born into a family of poets and writers, he initially drew inspiration from his parents, late Sri Indraganti Srikant Sarma, a renowned poet, and Srimati Janaki Bala, a writer. A fascination towards fiction since his childhood came from his grandmother's stories, which were visually detailed in their narration. He was a brilliant and creative student who took active part in all literary and cultural studies and events. After completing his graduation in English literature at Andhra Loyola College, Vijayawada, he stepped into the Central University of Hyderabad to finish his master's in English and thereafter obtained an MPhil degree from the same university. He later did a course in Master of Fine Arts from York University, Canada. His film Ashtachamma was released in 2008 and it was a huge success at box office. Sharp wit and subtle humor are his strengths. He writes the scripts for his films. Sri Mohan Krishna received many noticeable awards and gained respect and prestigious position in Telugu film industry. So far, he has made 9 films and his 10th film, V, is due for release. One of the important aspects of Sri Mohan Krishna's filmmaking is that he has touched all genres from fantasy to crime. Let me just briefly tell you about his awards. His prestigious award is Indira Gandhi Award for the best debut film of a director for his film Grahanam, which was released in 2005. Then he got the Nandi Award for first best film of a director for Grahanam and Nandi Award for best story writer for his film Antaku Mundu Aa Tarvata in 2013. He got Gollapudi Srinivas Award for the best first film of a director in 2005 for Grahanam and Akkineni Award for best home viewing feature film for his film Ashtachamma. Now I invite Sri Indraganti Mohan Krishna to begin his talk on the topic From Word to Image, the challenges in adapting literary works to films. Welcome, Sri Mohan Krishna.
Hi, hello everyone. I hope I'm visible. Am I visible to everyone?
Yes, you are visible and audible.
No,
Okay,
sir,
great.
I'm sorry, but your screen is not visible, sir.
No, it's visible, ma'am. Please adjust in your system.
It went off all of a sudden, ma'am. Could you please help us? I mean,
No, it is visible here.
Just kindly log out and log in, ma'am. It will solve your issue.
Sometimes
Oh.
I think it.
Yeah, you have to log out and log in again.
Yeah. I may not see myself, but I'm visible to everybody, I presume. So
Yeah, you can switch on your camera. I think you can see yourself, sir.
I have turned my camera on, but even then I'm.
You are visible, sir. No problem. You carry
I'm
on.
visible.
Yeah,
As long
we
as
can
I'm
see you,
visible.
sir. We
Yeah,
can
that's
see you.
important. Not see me seeing myself.
Yes, yes.
Actually, today I'm not. I'm not. I will not be showing any clips or anything because I thought there is a mixture of audiences also, mixture of participants because of which I don't want to focus only on Telugu films, but broadly talk about one of my favorite.
Sir,
Yeah. Hello.
excuse me, sir, you can show clippings.
No.
Doesn't matter.
I know.
We have a
I
mixed audience.
No. I can, but I decided not to because I thought I could talk about one
Okay,
thing.
sir.
One thing is there is a vast array of films I'll be talking about, and to gather clips of all those
Yes.
was like a bit of a task for me.
Yes,
And I
yes.
also thought I could just talk broadly about some of the issues that interested me always about adapting
Oh,
from literature to cinema. Not only films that I have done, but also generally some of the films that we keep watching and talking about, and some of the films that a lot of people appreciate without knowing that they are actually adaptations of great literary works. So I just want to uh, talk about briefly why it's a favorite. Um, Hello?
yes, sir, you can continue.
Yeah. Why it is a favorite topic for me. Anytime anybody cannot hear or anything, please let me know because sometimes the sound is going a little mute, so I'm not able to understand whether it's actually visible or audible. Okay, if anyone has a
Yeah,
problem,
yeah.
please do let me know.
We'll see to it, sir.
Yeah.
You can carry on.
So broadly, I'll talk about why I've always been interested in adaptation from literature. Partly because of, as most of you must have realized by now, that I come from a family of writers. My parents both are writers. My sister is a writer and a documentary filmmaker. Now she's on into feature films also. So there has always been, and my uncles are all like musicians and writers. My grandmother was a very good musician, and my aunt was a musician, maternal aunt. So there was always a very literary and musical environment at home, which kind of laid the foundation for broadly for my interest in the arts, especially dramatic arts and dramatic literature, prose dramatic literature. So that was the foundation that was laid. Uh, it is also as I was doing my graduation at Loyola College, I developed a deep interest in studying literature beyond my graduation, thanks to my teachers like Sureshan Garu and Mr. K. L. Narayana, Chandramohan, and others. I kind of developed a very strong interest in looking at literature seriously, like not as not just as a course I was doing, but also as a possibility of pursuing it as a career. At that time, I was thinking of becoming either a lecturer or a professor, or probably go into journalism because media was always one of my favorite professional fields. And it's interesting that my desire to adapt Ashtachama, which is actually inspired or a loose adaptation of Oscar Wilde's play called The Importance of Being Earnest, was actually sown in Loyola College when during one of my random interactions with one of my teachers, he advised me to just go to the library and pick up some works that are not necessarily part of my course. So I just picked up Oscar Wilde's collected plays, if I'm not wrong, and I happened to read suddenly Importance of Being Earnest, and I remember thinking to myself, it will be nice to see it as a film. That it was a very random passing thought at the time. So after that is how it started actually, but it is also gradually after my graduation, and I did my master's in English and I did my MPhil in African American literature from University of Hyderabad. Um, my desire parallel to that, I was watching a lot of world cinema, both in Hyderabad and in. I did watch a few very good films in Vijayawada. I know now, a lot of my friends keep telling me that I used to kind of narrate a lot of stories, I believe, to them in a very visual style, and literally kind of pester them with my narrations. And I guess I had this desire to make films. So after my literature, once I started studying literature as a discipline in post graduation, I think that's when my interest in literature and cinema. The marriage between cinema and literature kind of took shape, I think, during my post graduation days University of Hyderabad, and later I was, of course, I did a little bit of journalism. Then I worked in I made some documentaries as a writer. I worked as a writer for a few documentaries, and I've also directed a few. Then I went to, on the advice of one of my teachers, one of my colleagues, I went to York University in Toronto, did my master's in filmmaking. And that's when I actually understood screenwriting as a craft, and also how screenwriting is an offshoot of literature, offshoot of dramatic writing, which is like it kind of comes from the novel, the short story, and play. So it is all these, academically speaking, this is how I developed my interest. But it is also, I became more anxious about participating in doing these adaptations, also because I was becoming impatient and angry with the death, the gradual erosion of humanities and social sciences in our education, be it at the level of graduation or now, especially now, not when we were doing, but it started at the time. So when I started making films in 2004, I came across very few people in the film industry who actually read literature. Recently, I had a meeting with some of my colleagues, and most of them are not even aware of contemporary Telugu literature. So it's like one of my frustrations about that we have such a deep gold mine of literature. I'm talking about Telugu, and of course also world literature, but I was particularly interested in Telugu literature. That I thought, why is it that we are not dipping into that? Why is it that we are not taking ideas from there and making films? Because the constant complaint I heard was about not having enough stories. We don't have enough stories. So it's always talked about as if we are a culture that lacked stories to be made into films. That really irritated me, and I was like thinking, how is that possible? It's impossible for something like that to happen. So I started looking at it from that point of view, and that sort of strengthened my desire to become a filmmaker. And I always believed that cinema, whatever be the genre, I mean, I'm not saying good cinema should only be about good people, only showing goodness among human beings, that they should always talk about universal brotherhood. I'm not talking about that. I think good cinema can also show the worst of human qualities, thus thus making us go through a certain amount of catharsis, like seeing ourselves and how capable or incapable of humanity we are, by telling stories in different genres. You can do comedies. I've seen some great horror films. I've seen some great thrillers, and almost all of Hitchcock films are nothing but studies of human psychology for me, and some hilariously funny films that are actually great social critiques, great satires that are critiques of society. So I was always fascinated by this interaction between literature and cinema, and I started studying the possibilities, and I thought the best way for me to understand this and to grapple with it is to actually adapt from literature. So my first film I chose, instead of direct my own story, I thought, let me take up the challenge of adapting from the canonical Telugu canonical literature. One of which is like one of the greatest writers of the canon in Telugu is Chalam, and I thought I would just, one of my favorite stories of Chalam's was and still is Doshagunam, which I adapted as Grahanam in 2004. After I was trained as a screenwriter, I didn't want to take it up when I was a novice or a neophyte screenwriter. I wanted to be well trained before attempting a stalwart like Chalam, Chalam short story. So and of course it luckily turned out well, and it got a lot of recognition. And then, but anyway, I didn't want to be slotted as this art movie director, because I didn't believe in that kind of a dichotomy. I always felt that films are basically art. So there is nothing like, just as there is nothing like commercial music and art music, commercial painting and art painting, there is nothing like commercial cinema. I think cinema can be commercialized, but as an art form, It is an art form. That's it. There's no debate about it. So that's how it started, my journey in adaptation. And then I also, as I was adapting from literature to cinema, I also started studying the process. What actually works in an adaptation, what doesn't, why should we adapt, what is the beauty of adaptation, what's the fun in it, what are the challenges in it, how is it different from an original story to adapting, how is it different, what's the difference between these two exercises, and for those of you who've known my work and have been following closely, you would know that, including this current film that I've just completed, my 10th film, out of which 5 films of mine are either loosely adapted or inspired from literature. They're either adapted from or inspired by literature of various languages. Like, for example, Grahanam was adapted. It's more or less a direct adaptation of Chalam's short story called Doshagunam. Ashtachamma was part inspired and part adapted from Oscar Wilde's play, The Importance of Being Earnest. And my other film, I made a film called Bandipot, which is a kind of a crime caper, which is inspired by Edgar Wallace's series of short stories called The Brigand. And then before Samohanam, after Gentleman, I made a film called Ami to Me, which is another loose adaptation and inspired by a play called The Duenna by Richard Brinsley Sheridan, who's a famous writer of farces during the I think during the 18th century, not even 18th, I think 17th century. So it's like, so I've been also looking at various types of how is it to adapt a short story. What are the difficulties? What's the process? What's the process of adapting from a play, a novel, for example? Edgar Wallace is kind of a novella, a series of novellas. So it's like a short story, a novel, a play. I have plans to do more Telugu literature adaptations of the classics, like the writings of Buchi Babu, the writings of Kodavati Kutumrao, and some of the writings, contemporary writers. I want to adapt. And some of you who are also happen to be film buffs would know that some of the greatest classics we still cherish as part of our cinematic legacy are actually literary adaptations. Like they may be controversial and debatable, but they remain like Gone with the Wind, Ben-Hur, Ten Commandments, of course, is an adaptation of the Bible, and you would see almost all of Alfred Hitchcock's films are, many of us don't know that they're actually literary works. They're like short stories and novels that he has adapted of some of the great writers, and some of the great writers have written for him, for the screen for them. And some of the early Hollywood classics were actually written for the screen also by writers, by novelists who were migrating to America and who were also working in Hollywood. So it was a very interesting period, and even to recent times, if you see films like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, or even recently one of the big successes on television called Game of Thrones, all these are like literary works, both popular sometimes and also canonical, who've been adapted, which have been adapted successfully to screen, and it's thanks to that many people have gone back to those books and started reading them, to see how the whole process takes place. And interestingly, some of the great classic Telugu films, many of us don't know actually, for example, a film called Mallishwari by B.N. Reddy it was inspired in kind of a loose adaptation of a play by Buchbabu Garu. It's called Rayalavari Karanakurucham. Many people don't know. I don't know how many people know that. It is not a very well known thing also. And there is this very interesting film by K.V. Reddy called Gunasundari Katha, which is an adaptation of Shakespeare's King Lear. Very beautiful adaptation of King Lear. And there's this classic film by B.N. Reddy called Bangar Papa, which was also one of the National Award winning contestants. I think it won the best Telugu film at that time, but it was contesting with Satyajit Ray's Pather Panchali. If I'm not wrong, I may be wrong, but it's around the same time that B.N. Reddy made, which is inspired by a novel called Silas Marner by George Eliot. So these writers who were writing at the time, writers like Pingal Nagendra garu, D.V. Narsaraj garu, and other writers and directors like B.N. Reddy and K.V. Reddy, L.V. Prasad, they were also, and Chakrapani garu, one of the producers of Vijay Productions, was a very, very famous translator of Bengali novels into Telugu. He was a very good translator, and he himself was a very good dialogue and screenwriter. So this love, if you observe, actually, if you look at the 60s and 50s Telugu films, most of them adaptations of Bengali novels like Devadasu, Ardhangi, and some of the other films, Mangalyabalam. These were all originally Bengali novels that adapted to Telugu screen. But somewhere during the 70s and 80s, probably not even the 70s, 80s, I think around the 80s, after 80s, this tradition vanished in Telugu cinema. Till Yandamuri Virendranath and Malad and Krishnamurti, people were actually translating, adapting from popular literature like Yandamuri's novels like Abhilasha, Akara Poratam, Maran Mridangam. These were all adapted into popular films, and some of Malad and Krishnamurti's films also were adapted. And of course, earlier it was Yadrapudi Sulochana Rani, Arikpudi Kausalya Devi, Kodur Kausalya Devi. Some such very popular writers whose novels were adapted into films. So but later it went down, and we'll talk about it. There are many various socio-cultural, political reasons for it as to why that happened, but we can talk about it later. But basically, for those who are interested in adaptation, many people assume that adaptation is easy because already there's a story, there are characters. I've come across this many people thinking, oh, what have you done in an adaptation? The writer has already written the story. There are already characters. You just need to translate it in visual medium. Nothing can be more inaccurate because they are completely different media, film and literature, and they need to be understood as independent media, because most people mistake actually literature for cinema or theater for cinema, or even sometimes they mistake pamphleteering for cinema. They think cinema is a medium of social messaging, trying to change the society. I don't think it is in any way a medium for that. It's an artistic medium like theater, like a novel or a short story. It's a medium of artistic expression. Obviously, like all mediums of artistic expression, like all forms of artistic expression, there'll always be social consciousness, there'll always be social intervention, there'll always be a desire to change society. But once the desire to change society turns into some sort of a very frontal propaganda and takes over the fundamental qualities of that particular art form, then it ceases to be that art form and it becomes something else. So I think one of the dangers of adapting from literature to cinema is to mistake one for the other. So one has to be very clearly knowledgeable about both the differences and the overlaps between both the forms, be it a novel or a short story or a play. One of the things we have to observe, what's amazing for me is that the original ancient Aristotelian principles of storytelling, they are applicable to almost, even to this day. We have to, when I learned screenwriting, I went back to those same principles. They're taught as principles of storytelling, and you realize how much of study went into identifying them as principles of storytelling. There is actually a saying in screenwriting group, screenwriting community, fraternity. I don't know how many of you are aware of it. Some definitely literature students must have heard of it. Is that there are about 32 stories in the history of humankind. You can't tell more stories than about 32 themes, So people have to reinvent new ways of telling the same story again. If you boil down the number of stories that can be told by human beings, apparently, according to one research, it comes to around 32 stories, ideas. And also, the principles of storytelling that Aristotle basically, if you're familiar with poetics, I don't know how many of us are being taught that in colleges now, like broadly, and there are debates about it. Broadly, he said there are 6 elements that you have to keep in mind when you're writing anything that is dramatic. That is, first, there should be, the order sometimes changes. what the important elements of any good dramatic story are plot, character, theme, rhythm, language, and spectacle. Basically, some people argue that character comes first. Some say that plot comes first. But anyway, the first three are sometimes very closely related: plot, character, and rhythm. These three are, and theme. Sorry, not rhythm. So plot, character, and theme are closely related. Sometimes they kind of run into each other. Um, so that is an overlap between literature and theater and cinema. If you look at even a bad film, if these mechanics are not working, you can see that the film is not working. Just as a novel is not working, when these mechanics are not working, when structurally any of these elements in a dramatic structure are not working, then something is wrong. Of course, there's a deep discussion as to how all these elements should be arranged, in what order, and how to make sure that they don't go out of place or whatever. That's a different separate discussion altogether. But these are the overlaps. But the way we apply these is very different from format to format. Now, for example, uh, what actually gives you the excitement to adapt from literature, in my opinion, is any novel or a short story whose elements, these 6 elements I'm talking about, lend themselves to a smooth transition into another language. That is, from a verbal format to a visual format. There are some novels that are extremely translatable, or not only novels, but a play. Plays are more easy because plays format comes very close to that of a film. But in a short story and in a film, in a novel, this is what we look for. Now, these elements should make an engaging story to be told. That's what makes it adaptable. Now, for example, Doshagunam by Chalam is a very adaptable short story, whereas Chalam's Maidanam is not. It's an adaptable short story, in my opinion. Similarly, you come across great literary works. For example, P.G. Wodehouse is a famous comedy novelist. He's a brilliant writer who I don't think can be adapted, because the beauty of his writing is in the language and the use of language. And that language is not always translatable into visual terms. The joy of P.G. Wodehouse novel is in the way he uses language. So some of those things we can't translate, in my opinion, but some you can. So and these elements are principles. These are principles which need to be applied. So it's not enough for us to master the principles. We also should actually have the art to apply these principles to. So we should have this artistic raw material to which we apply these principles and convert it into a dramatic piece by using literature as a source, a literary work of art as source. Now, this is the biggest challenge in adapting from literature to film, because these two are completely two different media, and what is expressed in verbally may not always translate into visual terms. We see a lot of these overlaps, as I said. Sometimes we see some of these movies and we laugh, because you can see unknowingly, that this doesn't belong to film format. For example, in some films, the advantage, I'll tell you some of the differences between literature and film. Now, for example, when you're looking at a novel, in a novel somebody is upset, right? A novelist can describe how she or he is upset for about 2 pages, like what's going on in her or his mind, what is making her worry, write a lot about her internal conflict and her family story or something, some problem she's having. Blah, blah, blah. It can be explained and described, but in film you can't do that. In film, you just have to visually find a crisp and straightforward element that explains that somebody is upset. Now, for example, in lots of old Telugu films, you would have seen that usually when somebody is upset or somebody is going through conflict, they would freeze and you'd show exploding volcanoes and waves hitting the rocks in the ocean. These are usually elements, these are called cliches, because the filmmaker is unable to find visual equivalents of the internal conflict that the character is going through. So they simply made it literal. They kind of made it into a cliche. Now, this is something that makes for bad cinema, which is bad in the sense inferior cinema, let's say. But the biggest challenge in adaptation is to overcome these descriptive elements of literature into visual elements. Overcome them by using visual elements, and how innovatively we can use these visual elements while trying to overcome these descriptions is what is a challenging element in adaptation. In Grahanam, I had to use, like for example, if you look at Grahanam's end part in the last 15-20 minutes, there is a sudden dream sequence which comes in color. The rest of the film is made in black and white except the dream sequence. Now, the dream sequence is not in the short story. Chalam never wrote a dream sequence. Actually, most of the things I did in Chalam's short story in the film are not in the short story. But you use the source material in order to create those images. So I had to create a dream to show the protagonist is a 15-year-old boy, his relationship with a woman, his admiration of a woman, his innocent love towards a woman called Sharadamba. I wanted to capture the gist of that visually, which is not in the short story. So I created images based on some of the random elements that I've read in the short story and turned it into a dream. Now, you may not find it in the short story, but if you see the dream, the idea is to evoke the spirit of the short story or the spirit of that emotion through those visual elements. That was an attempt. Some people felt it was good. Some people felt it was a little distracting. I don't know. But the thing is, it was an attempt. You see that in many films, like some very good adaptations of great literary works. You will see this happening where a particular writer, a particular filmmaker takes certain elements of the short story and converts them into visual elements. And for example, in Grahanam, there is no such character called the brother-in-law, which was there is no in the short story. There is no such character at all. But but there is this whole thing about a villager trying to defame the woman. Not only one villager, a group of villagers trying to defame the woman. So what I thought, okay, I cannot create, and this is the interesting part. I don't have the money to have 10 villagers, to hire 10 villagers. Number two, I can't convince 10 actors to act without payment. So sometimes that it forces you to innovate. So I thought, why not I convert all these 10 characters of the short story, or the village. The village in the short story is a character. Now, why don't I make that village into a person? So I created a character called the brother-in-law, which is not in the short story, but which is inspired by the short story. So the novelistic element of the short story, the descriptive element of the short story, is borrowed and converted into a character and a visual element. So, one second, if you excuse me for a second, I just need to turn on the film. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we are able to hear.
Yeah, great. So the descriptive element of like what Chalam wrote for about, like, say 5 to 6 pages was converted into one character. Now, when we are adapting from literature to film, this is what we are looking at. For example, in Ashtachamma is inspired by the importance of being earnest, a play by Oscar Wilde. The entire play is written from the point of view of the man, the hero, the protagonist, called Jack. He's also called Ernest. His actual name is Jack. He changes his name to Ernest in the city, but he's called Jack in the village. Now, when I read the play, I thought for a contemporary audience, for my own sensibility, it will be interesting if I flip the point of view and present the film as a woman's story from the point of view of the woman. So I flipped it and kind of told from Gwendolyn, that is Gwendolyn in the play, but it becomes Lavanya, Swati's character in Ashtachama. But the interesting thing is, you don't have so much of Gwendolyn's character in the play, but I had to invent Lavanya's character using Gwendolyn as a primary source and create all her eccentricities, all her what do you call predilections and her whatever things she doesn't like, and create an eccentric but likable character out of using Gwendolyn as a source material. And that enabled me to contemporize the story, because Oscar Wilde's play was more a critique of England, of modern England, with its hypocrisies, with its false education, with its false etiquettes and false culture, false upper class culture and all that. It was a mockery of it, but nothing like that existed in my society. What I was interested in was other things. So I was trying to adapt that into to kind of comment on some of the things that I was interested in. Now, for example, if you look at Ashtachama was like, if you can see that it critiques it, underneath its comedy. Ashtachama is also a satire. It is cracking jokes about obsession with non-resident Indians. It is cracking jokes about how some of the marriages are happening in airports. Like people are like meeting each other in airports and things are being fixed, matches are being fixed, and how Telugu cinema peddles this cliched notions of feudal landlords. If you look at Rambabu's flashback, it is done in a deliberately satirical style to underline this visual cinematic cliches that we've been like subjected to all the time. So like they say, any good comedy is what the filmmaker is angry about, or the writer is angry about. So if you look at humor, it's always about what you want to criticize, but you do it in a funny way. So the literary work called Oscar Wilde's Importance of Earnest has given me the raw material to adapt into a completely different medium called cinema or film, and using it also to say some of the things I want to say to my contemporary audience. But where it became easy for me was by using some of the dramatic elements that were already there. The plot is already set. I just had to kind of alter it a little bit. There were characters which I can borrow and then convert into what I want. And the principles I was talking about, there is a beautiful plot. There are really amazing characters.
Hello, Raju sir.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know, it has stopped, both video, audio.
No. Now
It has started again? Okay.
unmute, sir. Unmute.
I'm just unmuting. Can you hear me now? Hello? You can hear now? Hello?
Yes, sir. We are able to hear you, sir. Yeah.
Okay. I was talking about till Ashtachama, you were able to hear, right? Where did I get cut off?
No, just a minute back it was cut off.
Okay. So in Ashtachama, it was like by using some of the elements I was talking about, the Aristotelian elements that are present in that play, it gave me a great plot. It gave me some of the great characters. It also gave me a great theme, and there was an internal rhythm to the play. The language, of course, was not alien to me. It's not my culture, my language, but there was a language which I can get inspired by or from, and there is also spectacle, which is visually I could do things that I can improve upon or adapt from. But the thing was, it was a different format. Basically, a play runs more on the performance of the actors and the most on exposition through dialogue. The actor is interacting with the audience in a play, whereas in a film, the actor is not interacting with the audience at all. The actor is just his or her role he or she is playing on screen, and the camera is the one that manipulates. Camera and sound manipulates the audience what do you call emotion, or how you want the audience to react to it. So to translate a play with its exposition through dialogue, exposition through the same kind of backdrop which you cannot change, except you can change curtains. How to change that into cinematic language, and how to change perspective. The perspective, like some of the elements that Wilde was using, are not useful to me, so I have to change. So by bringing in how to actually make the name, the whole play revolves around a name called Ernest. But Ernest, I can't translate into my language, and I cannot make it acceptable to my contemporary audience. So how do I do it? So I had to bring in Mahesh Babu. Mahesh Babu is being a big star, and his name, many people want to marry him or somebody with his name. So that's how it started. So for me, that was a raw material from which I took what I want and then converted it into a contemporarily presentable story, which is extremely relevant, but at the same time, in some ways, in many ways, original. That's what I wanted it to be. I want all my adaptations to be original. Not only mine, but if I see an adaptation, if the filmmaker cannot bring anything to the material, there's no point in adapting. Because adaptation is not plagiarizing the material. It's about throwing, I think, I don't know, I'm not able to recollect who said it, but it's about throwing a light on a crystal so that it gets refracted. So that you see different elements when it happens. So in order to, you have to throw light on material, but create a world out of that material which is contemporary, relevant, and at the same time entertaining for an audience who's paying money to come to enrich, their life experience. This is which I think is what cinema is all about. And if you look at a film like, for example, and sometimes what happens, you don't have characters in Importance of Being Earnest. The priest is Doctor, I think his name is Chasuble. It's the woman, if I'm not wrong, it's a woman who's interested in marrying the priest in the play. But I made it into the priest being interested in marrying the woman, because that gave me a dynamic. That gave me a chance to comment on men's idea of romance, comment on a certain, a certain chauvinism that runs through, those kind of men, but also the stupidity of those men. So using satire and farce as my what do you call creative elements, I was trying to do that. So adaptation is nothing but a series of choices. What to choose and what not to choose. What to choose, what to sacrifice. What are the most relevant elements for me to borrow from the original text and convert them into cinematic elements. And the process of the conversion is, you take from a literary work, you convert it into screenwriting terms, into dramatic terms, like what Aristotle was talking about. If you want to have more contemporary, does it have a good plot? Are the characters interesting? It doesn't have a good theme. Why should the audience pay money to watch it? Forget paying money. Even if it's coming on television, if it's coming free of cost also, why should they spend 2 hours in watching a story? Does it enrich their experience? Are they different after watching the film from what they were before watching the film as people? What kind of value addition are we promising through this creation, for which a lot of people are working for you as a director, and a lot of audiences are sometimes paying money and sometimes just coming and watching it, giving their time. So it's all about choosing elements from from a descriptive format to visual format, from sometimes non-dramatic elements to dramatic. Like, for example, I was talking about Chalam's long description of what was happening in the village being converted into a character called the brother-in-law. If you look at some of the other great adaptations which inspired me, like for example, Akira Kurosawa's adaptation of Throne of Blood, which is an adaptation of Macbeth, and Vishal Bharadwaj's adaptation of Macbeth into Makbul, and his adaptations of Omkara, which is Othello, you realize that this is what they've done. What they do is that they take the original material and root it in a contemporary, relevant, meaningful culture, which is ours, wherever you are living, and to make it relevant to more the local people for whom you are making the film. So that what gives me the kick about adaptations. Like imagine, I don't think Oscar Wilde would have imagined when he was writing the play that somebody X would be making after like 200 years something based on my play for an audience about whom he had no idea, but still that original text is making sense. And that is the joy of adaptation. The joy of adaptation is to bring these universally appealing stories to our audiences by using the raw material as fuel and converting it into a very entertaining, presentable film, work of art. Similarly, if you look at films like my next film is Golconda High School, which is also an adaptation of a novel called The Men Within. This is actually, Golconda High School is a dangerous film because it's an idealistic film. It's a film about how children's education is getting commercialized, how children are not allowed to flower and bloom naturally. They're not allowed to play. They're simply being arrested in these coaching centers and being treated like prisoners, and they don't have any other activity that can showcase their abilities. So it can easily slip into messaging, sloganeering, and lectures, which I didn't want. So the novel, of course, I didn't want it, but the danger in adapting from a novel to a film is all the agony of the writer. For example, the writer writes about, in his own way or her own way, writes about suppose the writer writes 3 pages or 4 pages about what is wrong with our education system. Now, if I make a character give a lecture for 10 minutes in the film, I don't think anybody would be interested in it. And they'll just walk out because that's not why they came. If I want to listen to a lecture, I'll enroll in a university or a course. But I wouldn't want to go to a movie. A film should dramatically communicate through drama, through story, through characterization, through plot, through theme, and spectacle and rhythm and language. It should communicate emotionally to me the issue at hand. So I had to invent ways of creating conflicts through the cricket matches, creating characters which come face to face conflict with each other, and by those conflicts you are generating you are basically creating or producing the theme that you are interested in. For example, Golconda High School's caption is Atalu Mahaku, which means to be able to play is our birthright. That's what children are saying. So that is the theme of the film. Now I cannot, as somebody said, I might as well send a WhatsApp message rather than actually making a film about it. But why would I want to come to a theater and see about how you are expanding this theme into a dramatic story? Now that is a challenge. So Golconda High School, I was trying to, in Golconda High School, I was trying to translate the essential complaint of the author, Harimohan Paravu, whose novel called The Men Within is adapted, about what is happening with our education system, especially school education system, but translated in a very engaging, dramatically engrossing manner, so the audience will have a life experience, like as if something really happening in front of their eyes, but through discovering the conflicts, the characters, and the agonies of the characters, and the ecstasies of the character, and the conflicts, and the thematic concerns of the film, you come out of the theater enriched or altered about that particular issue. And I was very heartened by many schools who told me that they've been showing that film to their students. Many lecturers have told me that they're showing, because it is entertaining and engaging. At the same time, it is pointing out about an issue that is actually being discussed now in schools. I want to join my daughter in humanities, and I'm not able to find a good college. Right? If she wants to study literature, I'm not able to find a good college that actually has, except one or two maybe. So, and it not being able to find a certain windows to so that the certain students individuals knowledge is allowed to flower is a major cultural problem. That's what I was talking about, when I was mentioning the death of humanities and social sciences and how it's affecting our appreciation of literature, and how indirectly it is affecting our the huge gap we are experiencing now between literature and cinema. How cinema is getting more commercialized and literature is not in a position to help it, because most of the filmmakers themselves are not aware of the literary scene. And even my other films, like if you look at Bandipoto is actually a classic example of failure. Actually, I was not able to translate the novel's central conflict into the film. For me, it's a case study as to when a protagonist. Sometimes the novel doesn't have a central conflict. That's what one of the challenges of adaptation. For example, you are writing you like a novel for what it is, and the novelist has a certain freedoms that filmmakers may not have. The novelist might write about a protagonist who does not have an objective in life or a motive in life. For example, Bandipotu is inspired by Edgar Wallace's The Brigand, who is about a man who goes around cheating people, like a con man, who kind of swindles money from people by involving them in various scams. There isn't a particular objective, there isn't a particular motive for that character in the novel, except that the writer has a certain sarcastic worldview, because of which he feels he has a right to rob rich people, let's say. Now, how much of it will be translated into film? If I make a film about a guy who's that kind of a person, how much will it appeal to people? Now, I had to make a choice about creating a conflict for the protagonist. The conflict has to go through some personal loss in order to decide to con people. Unless I create a justifiable conflict, personal loss, personal conflict for the protagonist, usually films don't work, because they do not have the luxury of over explanation or explanation for too long. For example, long ago, a great poet called Krishna Shastri, who's a famous, most of you know, Devulapalli Krishna Shastri Garu. He wanted to write a screenplay for this great classic called Bhakta Potana, which I think K.V. Reddy Garu was directing at the time. So he asked K.V. Reddy Garu, I want to write this screenplay. And K.V. Reddy said, look, you are a poet, you're a lyricist. Why don't you just write that? He said, no, I'll write. So he said, fine. And apparently Krishna Shastri Garu came back with the script. And the first line of the screenplay says, Potana Mahabhaktudu, which means Potana is a great devotee. Now K.V. Reddy asked, how are you going to show it? Is he going to wear a kind of a plank around his neck saying, I'm a great devotee? You have to write scenes that depict the devotion of Potana. Now that is called dramatic writing. And that is where that is the biggest challenge. Now in Bandipotu, in Edgar Wallace's 3 or 4 paragraphs of his satire should have been converted into a central conflict of the protagonist, which I failed to do, because which the audience failed to have a connect with the. And what is very important, if you observe in most films that you like, you have to empathize. You have to empathize with the protagonist. Unless you empathize, you put yourself in the shoes of the protagonist, you will not be able to go through the dramatic experience of the protagonist. There are 2 things called sympathize and empathize. Sympathy is I may not put myself in the shoes of the particular character, but I may cry for the person or what he or she is going through. But to be able to empathize, I have to feel that I am going through that experience. So when I failed to make my audience, although the novel is a very commendable work, the series of short novellas that Wallace wrote called The Brigand, although they were very commendable, but the core element of the novel, which the novelist did not bother too much to expand, but embedded in the book, I failed to extract it from the novel and convert it into a conflict. So what happened? The film became very episodic. Oh, episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. Okay, but the question was, why is he doing it? Why am I watching this guy doing all these scams? What is it that is at stake for him? So what happened? It might have had a great plot. It might have had a great theme. Great character, but it didn't have a theme. It didn't have. It didn't say. The film was not saying anything. All the novel was saying something. The film was not saying anything. So what was happening was, in the process of the adaptation, somewhere I lost track of converting the central idea, which the novelist is not explaining explicitly, which I am supposed to extract from the novel and convert it into conflict. Now, that process is the most challenging in adapting from literature to film. And those are the difficulties. One should never think that just because there is material available ready, there is a plot, there is I can easily just write down scene number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it will automatically become a great film. No, it won't. Actually, it becomes sometimes more difficult, because you have to choose between what is good, what is not, what should be taken, what should not be taken. And even a film like Ami to Me, which is an adaptation of Richard Brinsley Sheridan's play called the Duenna. I think I have another 5 minutes to wrap up.
Yes, sir. I think you can give some 5 minutes for interaction.
Yeah, I'm wrapping it up.
Okay, okay.
So the Duenna is also an adaptation, but the Duenna was set in the 17th century. It had a lot of anti-Semitic jokes, sexist jokes, which I had to censor and adapt it to a contemporary audience called Amitu. But it also had a certain risky, politically incorrect elements, which I had to go through and went ahead, take chances, and say, okay, humor has to be irreverent. But it also allowed me to critique a lot of social practices. And many people did not notice how big a satire that was, that film, social satire that was. So again, I had to go through the same process of, what are the elements that I can choose from among the so-called material. What is the plot? How do I redesign the plot? How do I the character, the theme, the rhythm, the language. Language, of course, in those days, Aristotle was talking about poetry, but we talk about, let's say, writing, the dialogue part of it, and of course the spectacle, the visual part of it. Of course, Aristotle also said, if I'm not wrong, that spectacle is the last resort of the poet. Those who cannot create rest of it will depend on mere visuals. So we should try to avoid it as much as possible. So with all these things, one of the major, now what is happening now as a concluding remark, what is happening in Telugu cinema is something I'm finding a lot in my discussions with my fellow filmmakers also. This, in the last 20 years, because of the death or the erosion of humanities and social sciences in our colleges and schools, there is a huge gap between cinema and literature, because most of the filmmakers are not drawing from literature anymore. They are not even reading literature. Many people do not even know that Telugu literature is still active and a lot of good work is being done. So when that is happening, although we are familiar with the craft, I may know all the elements of the craft, Aristotelian or somebody else's, but I do not have the artistic raw material. What the artistic environment, cultural artistic environment, I think what is called the zeitgeist, from which it's like a well from which I draw my artistic sensibility. That well has dried up because we are moving further and further away from literature, cinema, and it's becoming more and more commercialized, and the entertainment, the whole idea is only to entertain and to make money. When that is happening, we are experiencing, and that is because of this huge social change that has come about, of the erosion of humanities and social sciences, which are killing literature departments and sociology, history, political science. All these departments are getting eroded. All these, not departments, all these disciplines are getting eroded, because of which our exposure to them is dying, because of which we are drying up, where you have to have this vibrant cultural atmosphere from which an artist can draw and use these principles to tell very interesting and vibrant stories. And as long as that is not happening, especially this is the case with Telugu, because of which we are not able to compete with films from Tamil and Malayalam and sometimes Hindi and of course the world cinema, because they have not yet lost that relationship, that close contact with with literature. And when that happens, I think we'll have a very vibrant and very productive cultural scenario. The damage has been done, but I think now if we can revive this relationship between cinema and
So
literature,
many
I
are
think we'll
waiting
have
for asking questions.
so that is what I want to say, that we have to kind of revive literary the relationship with the literature and cinema in order to have a very vibrant and healthy and insightful cultural scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Mohan Krishna Garu. You have presented very clearly the nuances of adapting text to films. One has to be a creative genius to adapt a text into a film without getting the label of plagiarism. You have ingeniously adapted text suitable to the Indian context, and audiences have enjoyed your films. So I think there are a few queries.
Yeah, I can see some questions.
Yeah.
Sri Purnachandra Rao Garu, I think, said, how do you translate emotions from text to image? Can I answer one by one?
Yes, sir.
Hello, Andy. Hi.
Hello, sir.
Hi. Yeah, going by your question, how do you translate emotions from text to image? Right? That's your question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
See, that's exactly what I've said. Like I was giving an example in a novel, a novelist has a certain luxury of describing.
Yes.
ఇప్పుడు I can say for a novelist, తెలుగులో చెప్పాలంటే అతని మనసంతా గందరగోళం అయిపోయింది, అగ్నిపర్వతాలు బద్దలవుతున్నాయి, లేకపోతే అశాంతిగా అటు ఇటు రాత్రంతా నిద్ర పట్టలేదు అని I can write. But if నేను ఎగ్జాంపుల్ ఇచ్చినట్టు పాతకాలం మన సినిమాల్లో some of the films you would have seen that when somebody is going through conflict they would freeze the frame and they'll show exploding volcanoes and సముద్ర కెరటాలు వచ్చి కొట్టుకున్నట్టు. But these are all cliches. The challenge is always, మీరు అడిగిన ప్రశ్నలో ఉన్న పెద్ద ఛాలెంజ్ ఏంటంటే to find visual equivalents to depict emotion. For example, అశాంతిగా ఉన్నాడు అనేది, ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్ యూఆర్ షోయింగ్ సంబడి భోజనం చేస్తున్నాడు మనసు బాగాలేదు అనేది ఎలా చూపిస్తాం మనం? ఫ్రీజ్ చేసి అగ్నిపర్వతం చూపించడం కంటే సమ్ టైమ్స్ పీపుల్ సే హౌ ఆర్ యూ ఈటింగ్ ఇట్, గబగబా తింటున్నావా, కోపంగా తింటున్నావా, లేకపోతే తింటూ ఏమైనా విసిరేసావా, లేకపోతే. So when you're directing an actor, when you're making a film and when you're writing a screenplay, you have to write. That's why there is a fundamental difference between novel and a screenplay, or a prose writing and a screenplay. Prose can use adjectives, whereas a screenplay has to use mostly verbs. Because on a screen, I only see what you're doing. What is going on in your mind, I cannot see. So every emotional state should be translated into actions in a screenplay. So when you translate into action, the emotional equivalent of a particular emotional equivalent of what is going on in the mind of that particular actor or a character, that's when you see. Now the moment you see somebody throwing something, you know he's angry or she's angry. So the biggest challenge in filmmaking is to find, I'm just giving a crude example, but sometimes you deal with very complex emotions. For example, one of the most failed emotions is love. ప్రేమను ఎలా చూపిస్తాం మనం? గులాబ్ పువ్వు ఇవ్వడమో లేకపోతే కన్ను కొట్టడమో ఇలాంటి చీప్ టెక్నిక్స్ వాడుతాం. బట్ నిజమైన ప్రేమని చూపించాలంటే హౌ డు యూ రైట్ ఇన్ ఎ స్క్రీన్ ప్లే ఇస్ ద బిగ్గెస్ట్ ఛాలెంజ్. సో ఇట్ ఈస్ నాట్ అన్ ఈజీ థింగ్, బట్ యూ హావ్ టు ఆల్వేస్ ఫైండ్ అబౌట్ హౌ విజువల్లీ కెన్ ఐ త్రూ వర్బ్స్, యాక్షన్ వర్బ్స్, హౌ కెన్ ఐ కమ్యూనికేట్. అల్లకల్లోలంగా ఉంది మనసు అనేది ఇట్స్ అన్ అడ్జెక్టివ్ ఇన్ లిటరేచర్. బట్ హౌ డు ఐ షో ఇట్? ఐ హావ్ టు ఫైండ్ అన్ ఈక్వివలెంట్ వర్బ్ వెన్ ఐఎమ్ డూయింగ్ ఎ ఫిల్మ్, writing a film.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I am the closest to your maternal uncle Kumaraswamy, sir. I am the closest to your maternal uncle Kumaraswamy, sir.
Hi.
I am
Great.
a disciple and a colleague to him, sir. Actually,
from JKC College.
I always like your films, and actually, in today's world also, you are taking the themes from the contemporary world and also without spoiling the customs of our country. That's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, one more question. How do you translate emotions from text to image?
I think that is what I just
That
answered.
is what you just told. Yeah.
Answered.
Your whole talk was about it. There's one more question. How can she says And these OTT platforms have been in demand due to all the crisis going on. How can these be useful in portraying the adaptations?
No, it's yeah.
And how can they be conveyed to the audiences of all ages and different cultures?
I always believe OTT is. I don't think cinema is meant for OTT platforms. I don't believe that OTT is. It's only one of the media, one of the platforms. I believe personally that cinema is a communal experience. It is not communal, not in the sense of. One second, hold on. This battery is running out. I just need to plug it, and I'll get back to you in a second. You turn on the switch. Battery is almost dead. Yeah, I'm still continuing. Yani phone in the ground, sir. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We are able to listen.
Yeah. So OTT is only one of the options we have, and I don't think I'll ever see OTT as a replacement of the theatrical experience of cinema, because the beauty of cinema now OTT it's interesting. It's a bit like reading a book. Now, when I go to Netflix or Amazon, it's like I'm going to a library and picking up a book. But book reading is always a private affair, right? You sit and read. You may not finish the whole book at the same time. You read for half an hour, then something else comes and you stop. So the reading of a book is very different from the experience of watching a film in a theater with a group of strangers. And the beauty of cinema, the joy of film viewing, is about 500-600 people sitting in a dark theater, not knowing each other, but sharing the same life experience, laughing for the same thing, crying for the same thing. It creates a bond, a social, communal, not communal in the religious sense of the term, but communal in the literal sense of the term. Social, communal, and also emotional bond in a society between people, sharing of ideas, sharing of traditions, sharing of opinions, and clashing of opinions, whatever it is, it churns us as a group. Whereas OTT takes us away from everybody. So unless we talk to each other on the phone or meet somebody at some place and discuss about a particular film, we will not know. With that energy of collective experience will not be there in OTT. So personally, I'm not a big champion of OTT as the platform for cinema, but OTT has been able to host some really great films because it does not have the pressure of a commercial market. Sometimes it can attempt stories that are usually not attempted in the mainstream, which is a great thing. So I would treat OTT as an alternative platform which can accommodate certain kinds of story, but it is not a replacement for the theatrical cinematic experience.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, namaste, sir. I'm
Namaste.
again Dr. Sharda. It's a little added thing for your entire lecture. It was very interesting and reflective in one sense. Miranna, how we have to translate or what is the aesthetics that go in, turning out a text into a movie and all. Probably one thing what I personally feel is, manaki in the olden days, there was a clear-cut, declaration. Manaki Navala Chitralu, Navala Nayakalu, Navala Nayakalu, ila, and it was very popular. Maybe, probably, if today, ఇప్పుడు మీరు చెప్పినట్టు, there are many things that you have told which we were not even aware, even after watching and liking your movies. Because you have mentioned it, probably now I think I'll go back and see that if I can pick up that book and then read and again analyze it. So if that element is also taken care by the directors, or that also increases eventually the reading habit, whether it is as you said predominantly Telugu literature or any literature. If you can you can enlighten that this is something has been picked up from, like Grahanam was very popular. We know that it was from Chellam's. So maybe that care, if you can be one of the ambassadors taking up sensible movies. Yes.
One of my plans is actually to publish the screenplay of Grahanam and Ashtachamma and kind of try and encourage people to buy the original texts. You know,
That is wonderful, sir.
and they can read the screenplay in and compare it with the original short story or a novel or a play. So because I remember once one lady argued with me as to why I should take the writer's credit for Ashtachama, whereas it was a story by Oscar Wilde. So I was trying to tell her that
Hmm.
adaptation works at different levels. It's not always working because somebody else has written. You simply take the idea and you translate it.
Right.
You have to create a whole new set of words in order to make it acceptable to your audience, which is a form of creativity where you
In
very
its own
carefully,
self.
where you do take credit only after you are sure 100% morally that you have the right to take the credit, and the film should speak for it. You know what I mean? Like, so it's only where
Exactly, sir.
exactly where I feel that I can take the credit. I can prove to an audience, to an objecting audience or an individuals, that I can take the credit. Do I take the credit? And I was trying to explain the same thing to her, saying, what about all these elements? Who should be given credit for it? Should Oscar Wilde be given, or should I be given? So then she said, yeah, of course, maybe. Then, of course, what about
Probably, sir, like,
Rambabu's backstory ఎవరు క్రెడిట్ ఇవ్వాలి,
అది.
సర్వ శర్మకి ఎవరు క్రెడిట్, ఎవరికి ఇవ్వాలో మీరు చెప్పండి, దాన్ని బట్టి నేను ఇస్తా. I will issue an apology and give the credit.
So probably, and like people like you, because there are complex things involved in it. When we talk about ethics and morals, and apart from that, contemporary generation ni malli okkasari manamu a classics వైపు కి turn చేయడానికి. This
No,
would be.
And I was shocked recently. I attended a group of directors, young directors, new generation, so-called new generation directors meeting. Most of whom came to me when I was referring to contemporary novels. I've been reading some great novels written this year and last year, published by Tana. There's one novel called Kondapalam. There is a novel called Septabhumi. There are these great works of some really wonderful writings of Kadir Babu and Gopinika. Some of these young filmmakers have come to me and said, "Sir, ఇప్పటికీ రాస్తున్నారా అండి? అసలు రచనలు జరుగుతున్నాయా తెలుగులో?"
That's a pathetic state, sir.
And I was stunned because these people who get paid in crores remuneration. And these people's movies are watched by crores and crores of people every day on various platforms, and they don't even know that in their own language, literature is being produced. And forget about ఇంకే ఇలాగే ఉండే పరిస్థితి. ఎన్ని రకాల లిటరేచర్స్ వస్తున్నాయి ఇప్పుడు. You have Dalit literature, you have minority literature, you have all kinds of literatures, feminist literature coming, and they have forget about all that. They don't even know that a kind of literature is being produced in Telugu. That's partly I could not cover it in my lecture, but basically that's happening because of the advent of the internet and all these other media. Writing habit has gone to the dogs. People are not reading anymore. Now, earlier when people read, there used to be these magazines, even popular literature ఉండేది, ఎండమూరి మల్లాది, సీరియల్స్ వచ్చేవి. ఇప్పుడు అవి కూడా చదవట్లేదు ఎవరు. And I have come across many filmmakers who can't even write a single paragraph in Telugu.
Excuse me, sir.
So that is a scenario. So we have to work on exposing people first to literature, and then hope that they'll pick it up.
Excuse me, sir. This is Supriya from Department of English, Maristella College, sir.
Hello.
Sir, we like your movies like Ashtachama, Me to Me, and other movies.
Yeah.
They were very successful, sir. And this is because of your successful adaptation of the stories, sir. And this is because you retain the flavor and essence of the original stories in the films. Is it the secret of the success of those films, sir?
See that the thing is this is the funniest thing, because when I wrote Ashtachama, I was talking to one of my friends and I said, "Hey, this is inspired by Oscar Wilde's play." And he said, "Arey, ఎందుకురా చెప్పడం, అది ఎవరికి తెలుస్తుంది? నువ్వు చెప్పపోయినా ఎవరికి తెలియదు కదా. Don't mention it," he said. But I had mentioned it at the end of the film. If you see, it says to Oscar for his wild inspiration. But I remember one literary person who watched the film said till halfway I didn't recognize it. I didn't realize it was Oscar Wilde's. But when the whole flashback of Rambabu started, I said, "Hey, this is Oscar Wilde. This I've seen." And he thought for a moment this guy has stolen the story. He's plagiarized it and he's actually claiming it to be his story. Till the end, when he saw it, he felt okay. Then he called me and said, "I want to apologize to you. because I thought you stole it. But 90% of the people wouldn't have known that I had actually taken it from them. So coming back to Supriya, your question of whether, I don't think many people would even know what the original essence is.
Yeah.
Because they didn't read the original.
Of course, who have read it.
It's my responsibility as a filmmaker to tell them there is an original. You read it, then you'll know how much of the essence I used. But from my point of view, me question answer Japanante, yes, I think the majority, a lot of the credit for the success of Ashtachama will go to Oscar Wilde, because it is Oscar Wilde's worldview, his sarcasm, his desire to critique hypocrisy that I borrowed from, which I used as fuel to adapt Ashtachama. So the original essence is retained, because of which the film is a success, I think. And also it also speaks volumes about Oscar Wilde's ageless, timeless sense of his ability to understand human nature.
One more small question, sir. And how do you choose such titles for your films?
that is something I also don't know. And it just happens. I think it comes from the story. It basically, you are thinking about, you think constantly, you write hundreds and hundreds of very bad titles also sometimes. And then something strikes one day, and then, but you won the titles, so chattavi raayakapothe adi raadu. You can't sit and think up a brilliant title. So I was also, but ఒకటి నేను డిసైడ్ చేసుకుంటాను అంటే కథలో వీలైనంత తెలుగు టైటిల్ పెట్టాలి, అది బాగుంటుంది. కొన్ని కథలు ఇప్పుడు వి తీసాను, వి హ్యాస్ టు హ్యావ్ ఎ నేమ్. ఆ సినిమా చూస్తే మీకు ఎందుకు వి అని పెట్టారో తెలుస్తుంది. బట్ ఐ ట్రై టు అవాయిడ్ unnecessary use of English when I.
Sir, one last question, sir. What is the source for Sammohanam film, sir?
What is the?
Is there any source for this film?
Sammohanam ETV Win app అని ఉందండి, దానిలో ఉందండి, Win app.
Okay.
And US Amazon lo undi, but I don't know how to access it, but we are trying.
Sir, the question is, మీరు మిగతా అన్ని మూవీస్ కి చెప్పారు కదా, is there any adaptation behind Sammohanam?
No, actually, I know what there is this huge discussion about whether it's inspired by Notting Hill, whether it's inspired by కొన్ని discussions జరిగాయి ఆ సినిమా గురించి. But if you actually, it is really silly. If you watch Notting Hill is, I don't know how many of you have seen the film. It's a Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant film, which is it's about a guy, a bookseller who falls in love with an actress. But as a thematic inspiration, I absolutely love that film. But actually, as again, polikundadu. Asal sambandham undadu. The reason, the inspiration for Sammohanam came to me from a real life experience I had when I was making Golconda High School. ఆ సినిమా తీస్తున్నప్పుడు ఒక ఇంట్లో మేము షూట్ చేసినప్పుడు ఆ ఇంట్లో వాళ్ళందరూ కాలేజ్ సెలవు పెట్టి ఆ రోజు ఉండిపోయారు 2 days just to see the shoot. And I also met a man during the shoot who was passionate about films and acting, and who wanted to quit his job and become an actor, because చిన్నప్పుడు వాళ్ళ నాన్న వాళ్ళని ఆయన సినిమాలకు వెళ్ళనివ్వలేదుట. సో ఆయనకు ఆ కోరిక ఉండిపోయింది, నేను సినిమాలకు వెళ్ళాలి. సో ఐ థాట్ ఎట్ ద టైమ్, హౌ వుడ్ ఇట్ బి, ఒక ఇంట్లో షూటింగ్ ఇస్తే అసలు ఆ ఇంట్లో వాళ్ళ పర్స్పెక్టివ్ నుంచి కథ చెప్తే ఎలా ఉంటుంది. From that point of view, Sammohanam happened. It is inspired hugely, and అది కూడా నేను మెన్షన్ చేశాను Sammohanam opening credits లో. You will see the acknowledgement to the writer and director of Notting Hill and a film called A Week with Marilyn. ఈ రెండు సినిమాలు in spirit they inspired, but story కి అసలు ఏం సంబంధం ఉండదు. And I do not free make other people's films as a matter of policy. There's no other inspiration except a real life experience.
I'd like to ask a question, sir. Last question.
Yeah.
Sir, we are exceeding time, I think.
Yes, last question, madam.
Because okay.
I'll quickly answer and wrap it up.
Yes, sir. As the theater is gradually disappearing in India, don't you feel difficulty in finding the actors to your films, sir?
No, that is a practical problem, Andy. There is definitely a problem. But theater is not entirely disappearing. There are some very good theater groups still working.
Yeah.
It's my job as a filmmaker to search, and there are some other actors who are not necessarily theatrical, but they're trained actors.
Okay.
So I try to, basically, I'm always constantly trying to find from theater, from real life, from some people are simply talented. They'll put up a video and you see something brilliant. So it's difficult. It is, theater used to train people in language, which is a major problem. మనకి తెలుగులో సరిగ్గా మాట్లాడడం రాని వాళ్ళు కూడా నట్లు అయిపోతున్నారు. అదొకటి ఛాలెంజ్ ఇప్పటికీ నాకు. బట్ అదర్వైజ్ వీ హ్యావ్ వెరీ గుడ్ టాలెంట్ అండ్ ఐ కీప్ స్కౌటింగ్ ఫర్ ఇట్.
I cherish your flow of speech, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we enjoyed your oratorical
much.
skills.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and to all the participants. I'm sorry, I've seen a lot of questions, but I'm not able to answer due to lack of time. Maybe some other time.
Yeah, I'll just read out. One person says, Krishna Sri Aramilli says, you are from great writers family, but what stops you to adapt the literary classics of your father or mother or grandfather to make a good film, sir?
No,
We have
actually,
tried almost all genres except
No,
biopics and sci-fi, he says.
Yeah. My first question, my thesis screenplay is my mom's novel, which I've adapted, which I want to eventually make into a film. And I'm also planning to adapt Butchbabu Garu's writings and that of Kodavati Andi. And also, my father is not a novelist. My father is mostly a poet. But if you know, my father wrote songs for Antakumundu Tarvata. He wrote for Sammohanam. He wrote for Golconda High School. So whenever I could ask him, I always wanted him to write for me lyrics. My mother's work certainly I'm planning to make, but I will let you know when the time comes. What that is, but yes. And the second thing about sci-fi and biopics, I will probably be making a kind of a futuristic film or a sci-fi film soon. If once the lockdown is over in a year or so. But biopics are a little tricky for me. Unless I'm really excited by the drama in the life of that individual, I won't be excited about it.
Thank you, sir. Very good.
Thank you.
Answers. So we conclude the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The two resource persons, Dr. Uma Brugubanda and Shri Mohan Krishna Garu. Thank you very much for your very interesting sessions.
Thank you so
sir.
much.
Thank you, sir.
Bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Participants, please log in by 10:15 tomorrow. We'll begin the session at 10:30. Thank you. And you will get a mail, I think. Yes.